Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with Kat Zavis from the Network of Spiritual Progressives. Thanks, Kat, for joining me for this dialogue.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I want to start off by introducing you. You're a collaborative, I saw from your website, you're a collaborative divorce attorney, mediator, coach, and conflict resolution empathic communication trainer, and you've just become the executive director of the Network of Spiritual Progressives. Do I have that right, or is there
Yep.
more you'd like
No,
to add?
you pretty much covered it. Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm doing work on empathy. How do we build a culture of empathy? And I have a Google alert out, news alert on anything that kind of comes across the internet on empathy. I kind of keep track of it, and it popped up your empathy workshop in Oregon with Michael Lerner, who I've also interviewed from the Network of Spiritual Progressives, and started reading more and more, saw that you do empathic communication, NBC training, and so I really wanted to just kind of talk with you and hear a little bit about what you've been doing and what's happening with the Network of Spiritual Progressives.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. Well, maybe I'll just start to give people a sense of what the network is, and then I can talk a little bit about the workshop that kind of alerted you to us again.
Okay.
So the Network of Spiritual Progressives is an organization. It's the outreach and education arm of Cocoon magazine. And Cocoon stands for Heal, Repair, and Transform the World. So the Network of Spiritual Progressives is the outreach arm of Cocoon magazine, and it's the way through which we try to reach into the world and put forth a vision of a world based on empathy, based on care and kindness and love. And we do that through action, like actual proposed amendment to the Constitution and other proposals, through education, and through consciousness changing. And so Cocoon magazine, for example, is one of the ways we do consciousness raising and consciousness changing, as is the Network of Spiritual Progressives itself. And the key thing that we're trying to promote is a new bottom line. And so currently in our culture, our culture and our institutions and all our institutions, our educational systems, our government, our corporations are judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that they maximize money and power. And when that's the means by which we judge the effectiveness of our institutions, then we really exclude from that analysis things like empathy, things like care. And so we're promoting a new bottom line that judges institutions, governments, corporations, and the like to the extent that they maximize love and kindness, care and generosity, ethical and environmental sanity, social and economic justice, the capacity to treat each other as embodiments of the sacred, or if that feels a little too spiritual for folks, to treat each other as human beings. As we see infants, when we hold an infant, we just adore them and honor them just because of their being. We're not asking for anything from them. We're just honoring who they are. And also our capacity to respond to the universe with awe and radical amazement and wonder. Because if we can treat the universe and the earth in that way, we're going to be much more likely to be willing to make the choices we need to make, some of which will be challenging to us, to save our environment, to save our planet. So that's the work that we're trying to do, and we do that through various avenues. One avenue is through trying to get people in different professions to start to engage in conversations with each other about what would it look like if our profession was based on these new bottom lines. So what would it be in a corporate culture to ask ourselves, let's not prioritize money and power, let's prioritize care, kindness, love, generosity. Empathy, of course, encompasses those things. What would it look like to have an educational system that was focused on that, a healthcare system, a legal system, a political system? Imagine that. So those are the types of questions we're asking. One of the concrete proposals we have, which you may be familiar with, is the Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And that amendment overturned Citizens United and the McCutcheon decision, so that money is not speech and corporations are not people. It also goes a step further than that and actually requires that all federal and state elections be publicly funded. The second component of it looks at corporations and says that corporations that earn $50 million or more per year have to get a new corporate charter every 5 years. And to get that corporate charter, they have to prove a satisfactory history of environmental and social responsibility to a panel of ordinary citizens. So just imagine if corporations in their boardrooms started to have conversations. Well, are we being socially and environmentally responsible? Maybe we don't need to produce another new product. Maybe we should redirect our energies and resources. How are we treating our employees? What are we doing with the waste materials? Where are we placing them? How are we doing in the world, not just in our corporation, but actually at the end of our product? What's happening with that? And the third component would require schools of all grades to incorporate things such as empathy and compassion training in the schools, environmental awareness and sustainability. How do we sustain our environment? Civic engagement, those types of skills that are not being taught very effectively, if at all, in most schools right now. Mm-hmm. And that would help deal with issues such as bullying and aggression in schools. So those are just some of the concrete proposals. Folks can read more about that and other proposals at spiritualprogressives.org.
I can show a screen share right here.
Oh, great.
Up on the screen. If there's anything you want to say about the website,
awesome. Thank you. So if you go to the website and under where it says, what is the Network of Spiritual Progressives, it explains it. And then on the right side where you see the tab, Our Yearning for a Loving World, there's other buttons down there that allow you to explore some of the things that we do. Our Global Marshall Plan is there, which is an amazingly empathic plan to take 1% to 2% of the gross domestic product of the ruling countries, the powerful industrialized countries, and redistribute them to the countries, the non-industrialized or so-called global south countries, to once and for all eradicate global hunger, poverty, homelessness, inadequate health care, and inadequate education. And it would also forgive debts and overturn a lot of the NAFTA-type agreements that we have that create a really strong power imbalance between countries. So those are some of the work that we're doing. And then one of the things that we promote very strongly is that to create a mass social movement and a transformative movement, we have to not just speak about creating peace and creating empathy and creating kindness and understanding, but we actually have to live it in the movement that we create. And so we promote efforts to understand the situation of the so-called other, whomever that other is, whoever it is that we're othering, whether it's governmental administrations or people on the ground or the right or the left, or to really try to understand why are people approaching and responding to our world crises and our situations right now in the ways that we are, and how can we speak to them from an empathic place. And one of the things that Rabbi Michael Lerner learned through his work was that one of the things that has created a great divide between the right and the left, and why the people on the right are voting for politicians who seem to implement policies that are really contrary to their economic interests, the citizens' economic interests. Why are they doing that? That seems so bizarre, right? Well, the reason they're doing that is because the right is speaking to some real deep needs, and those are the needs for meaning, for purpose, for a sense of something greater than ourselves. And the left isn't talking to those needs. The left is talking about political rights and economic entitlements, all of which are important, but ultimately are not life-sustaining in the sense of people's hearts on a real personal level. And so people have shifted to the right because of that, because the right is speaking to those needs and is putting forth a worldview. And so we need to start to put forth a worldview that's very different, and that's the worldview essentially of the new bottom line, that homeland security happens through generosity, not through domination. That homeland security happens through empathy, not through violence. So the workshop that you got information about, we actually did it yesterday as well in Berkeley, is a workshop on on mourning and grieving about the whole situation in Israel-Palestine, and then on how to communicate on such a difficult issue across our differences. And so we focused, should I talk a little bit about it? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, if a little bit of an overview of it, that's what
Okay.
kind of attracted me to, or
Hmm.
had me find out what
Yeah.
about you. It was what was the name of it? It was empathy. I just empathy workshop is what I had here.
Well, the name was Healing and Grieving, Mourning and Grieving Israel, Palestine, and Communicating Across
Okay.
Differences.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started with a little exercise to allow people to just tap into the grief they have about, specifically, I mean, this past summer was so awful. So specifically about what's been happening in Israel, Palestine, and how people have felt about it, both in terms of what they see happening on the news and what they read about that's happening in Gaza and Israel. And also, there's a lot of mourning and grief people have at the extent to which this circumstance resulted in the fact that people lost friendships, that people lost the inability to talk with people about this issue because it created such a rift in families and in friends and in communities. So there was an opportunity for people to just really tap into their sadness and grief about that. And it's my belief that grieving is the bedrock for healing, repair, and transformation, and that we really need to have space to mourn and grieve those wounds, if you will, those emotional wounds, those heart wounds, before we can heal, repair, and transform. And when we don't do that, our work to heal, repair, and transform is not nearly as effective.
Okay,
So,
so it was we're creating a space for people to share their grief, and then they could be heard within the group, I imagined, about their grief. Is that?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that was a very short little, I mean, it was only a 4-hour workshop, so that was a short little piece of it. And then we went into talking about, well, how do we, what triggers us in conversations? If somebody says something about the situation in Israel, Palestine, we find ourselves engaged in a battle, right? Like, I'm going to prove I'm right and prove you're wrong. And it becomes a battle of wills almost, and a battle of wits and facts.
Mm-hmm.
And no one's communicating, talking across cross purposes, and no one's actually having a real conversation. And so first we focused on what's going on inside of each person when somebody says something to them that's difficult to hear. So we practice self-empathy. Why am I triggered? What's going on for me? What is it that I'm feeling, and why am I feeling this way? What is so important to me that I would feel so upset or distressed or tense or reactive? And so we practiced that, and then we practiced how to hear the other person in an empathic way, to understand what it is that's motivating them beyond their words. So if somebody says something that's difficult to hear, what is it that's motivating that? What is the needs? What are the fears? And to help people understand how to empathically engage in that dialogue with the other person. And so we did a whole bunch of practice on that. And then we started talking about empathically speaking or compassionately speaking. How do we express ourselves in a way that isn't loaded with judgment, blame, criticism, or even trying to convince or trying to win or trying to be right, but instead is really embedded in trying to understand, trying to hear each other, trying to find the common needs that they share, such as, in a circumstance like this, the deep need for safety for all beings, the deep need for peace, for people to be able to live lives that aren't just constantly in fear, right? To be able to raise your children in a healthy, safe environment.
Well, before we go too much deeper, could we maybe frame this in the terms of empathy? For me, you know, I grew up in an evangelical Christian fundamentalist family here in Sacramento, California. And I would say, you know, doing a lot of traveling, I moved more to the progressive side. But over time, as I've kind of learned more about empathy, I've kind of like left the progressive side as well, saying I'm kind of on the empathy, the empathy party side, I guess, in the sense that I see that the progressives seem to be mirroring a lot of the conservatives. If you look on MSNBC and Fox, you know, they're just kind of, you know, kind of battling each other, judging each other. A lot of times
Right.
progressives can be highly self-righteous. It's like you're, you know, it's like I'm for caring for the world, and you're not doing that, so you're a bad person. So it kind of can be judgmental too. So it seems to me that they're both in that kind of battle with each other,
Mhm.
and there needs
Yes.
to be like a third position, I would say the empathy party almost, in the
Mhm.
sense that somebody's got to empathize with both of them, and also to get them to start empathizing and holding that empathic space. So I guess I'm kind of seeing that. I know you do nonviolent communication, compassionate communication, and it seems to me that empathy is the space that we can meet in. It's the larger container where within that gateway that we can start having those dialogues and that connection with each other. And so I'm just wondering, how do you see the network of spiritual progressives and relating to empathy? And that's also when I saw that you were becoming the new director, I guess I also was thinking, oh, maybe there's more of an emphasis, going to be an emphasis on empathy than maybe I've seen in
Mhm.
the past.
Mhm. Well, you have identified the issue really well. That one of the things that's happened, and the reason why there's such a huge divide between the right and the left, is because there isn't a capacity, or seeming even on some level a desire, to understand where the other side is coming from, and to hear each other, and to actually see the shared values and needs, even if their ways of achieving those are very different. And so that is exactly what the network of spiritual progressives is attempting to do, is to find that middle space of the shared values and to speak to those shared values. So really, if we start to speak to the values that are embedded in the new bottom line, the values of care and kindness and love and generosity and empathy and compassion and treating each other as embodiments of the sacred, even if I deeply disagree with your solutions, I can still see you as a human being worthy and valuable. Then we will find a path to new solutions that both sides can agree to. And I agree with you that right now it's, attack and attack, back and forth. It just
Mm-hmm.
looks like people screaming at each other, and it's exhausting, and it's really depleting, I think, to our souls and our beings and our hearts. And so that is exactly what the Network of Spiritual Progressives is attempting to bring in. It is one of the things that I find incredibly important and valuable, and that I do hope to enrich and deepen in the NSP. It's already there. I mean, if you read, for example, Rabbi Lerner's book, Embracing Israel-Palestine, it's filled with an empathic position and understanding of why both sides are approaching and responding to the situation the way they are. It provides a very empathic understanding of the history, actually, which is a very unique thing, right? To look at history through an empathic lens, so that you can understand that the choices that they're making, while seemingly crazy on some level, are also, you can also look at it from an empathic place of understanding, even if you find the choices completely horrific.
Yeah, I
So
had
yeah, that is
interviewed
exactly what we're doing.
Michael as well. Have a interview of him talking about empathy, as well as Peter Gable,
Uh-huh.
um, who's also, I guess, one of the founders, co-founders of,
Yeah.
I believe, of.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
so I had talked to both of them about empathy as well. So I guess I'm kind of also wondering, what will you be doing? I mean, am I accurate on that? That you were going to be putting more of a focus on empathy with your work, or
Well,
I'm just, I don't know. That was my
wishful
sense. Just
thinking.
wishful thinking, maybe, from what I
Right.
saw in
Well,
what you
I
were
mean,
doing, and.
yeah, so I'd say both and. I mean, all of the work that we do is grounded in an empathic perspective and approach, as well as grounded in an approach of the fact that we have to be speaking to people's deep needs for meaning and purpose, and that requires empathy.
Mhm.
I mean, empathy to me includes valuing and understanding that people have deep needs for meaning and purpose. And how do we do that? We do that through hearing each other, through standing in each other's shoes and trying to really get a picture of how they see the world, and really deeply trying to understand that. Not just understanding it to manipulate so we can get our way, but actually deeply understanding it and allowing ourselves to be moved by that understanding.
Hmm. Well, one
So,
thing oh,
so we're
sorry.
doing. So
Go ahead.
let me just finish the
Yeah,
question, if I
please.
may, quickly. So we're doing things like these trainings because on empathy and compassion and understanding on Israel-Palestine, so that people can start to hear the other side and be more effective in their approaches, and in trying to find out how to engage in transformation in this particular area effectively and powerfully. In addition, we're doing workshops and trainings for social activists, social change activists. We're calling them transformative activist trainings. Maybe we should call them empathic trainings for social activists, but trainings where we're teaching social activists a couple of things. One of which is, if we look at all the social change movements that are happening, all the work that's happening on all the different areas, right? There's thousands of them. There's homelessness, there's housing, there's homelessness, hunger, prisoners' rights, racism, sexism, coal, fracking. The list goes on and on and on. And at the foundation of all this wonderful work is the desire for a new world, a new worldview, a worldview based on this new bottom line of love and care and kindness. But none of the organizations are talking about that. They're not using that language. They're basically talking about rights, legal rights, and political entitlements. Political rights and economic entitlements. And so we are going to do trainings for social activists to talk about it in terms of these deeper values and needs. And we believe that as we do that, actually, it will start to cross a divide between the left and the right. The other thing we're going to be doing in those trainings is teaching activists how to be empathic towards those with whom they strongly disagree. So how do we engage in conversations about difficult issues like abortion, for example, from an empathic place? How do we look at what the other side is saying and proposing and really try to understand where they're coming from? I remember in the last primary, I think it was Santorum, I can't remember, who was talking about his child who had some severe physical handicaps. The child was born with severe physical handicaps. I don't remember, a spinal bifida or one of those, just really, really sad. And he was taking this really strong position that was anti-abortion or anti-choice across the board. And I was watching him being interviewed on TV about this, and he started talking about his child. And he started talking about how he couldn't imagine not having his child and what a horrible choice that would have been. And all of a sudden, I realized he sees the abortion debate in the context of his own personal situation and the dilemma that he was faced with and continues to be faced with as he struggles to, raise a child with severe handicaps. And so it allowed me to feel a lot of compassion for where he was coming from. It didn't mean I agreed with his position, but it allowed me to tap into seeing him not as he's been portrayed, as this evil person who doesn't care about women's rights, but as a suffering person, as a person who's really struggling and suffering with the complexities and challenges and difficulties of raising a child who has severe challenges and who will have a difficult life, and understanding he made that choice, and that also was a difficult choice. And so if we can start to tap into and look at people from that perspective, from a place of suffering and pain and sorrow and fear and grief, and trying to understand then what are the needs that are giving rise to these policies and positions that we don't agree with, then I really think we can cross that divide. And so those are also some of the things we're going to be integrating into these trainings, so that people in the progressive world can speak to people across differences that have been so embedded and so entrenched in our culture that we're getting nowhere.
Yeah, when I go home, visit my family, I deal with all these issues. And, growing up, we had a lot of conflict. I felt I was right, a lot of self-righteousness. And then over time, as I became to get interested in empathy and see the kind of the power of empathy, and I started empathizing more with where my family, where they were coming from, it's really made a big difference in terms of connection. And I've actually started doing mediation, like within the family, conflicts that arose, starting to mediate those, as well as having family empathy circles where we use empathic listening to dialogue with each other. So I feel very optimistic, and I've seen the evidence too that the divide that we have in the country, you know, with can be, if empathy became a shared value, that it could become the space through which the dialogue could happen. And I've seen some of your other videos where you're talking about empathic communication, and how once people really hear each other's deeper feelings and needs, that it's almost like magical how the door opens up for creativity to
Right.
start creating solutions to the various problems.
Right. Right. One of the things that's interesting that I just want to share as we talk about this is that what I found in my mediation work and my collaborative divorce work is that when people come into my office and we create an environment where there's a lot of empathy and people are heard, they, as you said, they come up with these magical creative solutions. And it's quite beautiful, actually, to be a witness to and to see and to help facilitate to the extent that I might. Um, and then what happens is, and I actually say this to my clients now, is that when they leave my office and they go into the real world, where empathy is not the driving principle, where, you know, one-upping and getting better than and getting my rights and minimizing my obligations is the world we live in, then they leave my office and they go back into that world, and a friend or a family member or a colleague or a coworker says, "Why did you agree to that? The court would never have ordered that. Are you crazy? I can't believe you agreed." You know, and it starts to undermine the empathic space that was created in the sanctity, if you will, of the office.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've started to talk to my clients about is the fact that we've created this empathic space in my office, and we need to work to create this empathic space in the world so that you have the support to sustain this heart connection, which is contrary to the message you receive in the world. Because the message we receive in the world, because of capitalism, is watch out for number one.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of yourself. If I don't, someone else is going to step on my toes, so I've got to step on your toes, right? And so when we create empathic space, and we are able to reach across our differences, we have to remember that the world isn't in that space yet. Slowly, we're hoping to expand that, and that it's important to acknowledge that that makes it harder for people to stay in that space once they leave it. And so I think it's really helpful to just name this for people.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to go out into the world and it doesn't look like this, and so you're going to think you made a mistake or that you're crazy or you've given up. But in fact, that's what their heart wants. And what the world does is it closes us off from what our heart truly wants. And no one believes it's possible, right? No one actually believes that everyone else wants a world based on love and kindness. But in fact, we all do. And the more we're willing to talk about it, and this is what I'd invite the listeners to do, is to start to talk about this. Come out of the closet, if you will, and say, yes, I'm for love, I'm for kindness, I'm for empathy, I'm for caring for each other. I believe we can have security in our world if we actually were empathic and caring about each other rather than dominating each other. And if people start to talk about this, then it would make it safer for people to actually live it, and to live it outside of narrow constructs where that safety container is created.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed too. Is you get together with the group, you have very empathic connection, and then I go out into the world and I can feel the pressure, the worldview start. I mean, it's a visceral feeling, kind of moving in, kind of the fears, the tensions, kind of, and so I'm really seeing the need for. It's almost like not a church, a synagogue, whatever, of empathy, of that culture where you're constantly getting that support, and because otherwise it's hard to maintain that in a world that's pressure. And I think you really articulated very well that that quality. So it's really, how do you create that container and that space to support it?
Right. And so one of the things we're hoping in the Network of Spiritual Progressives is that people will start NSP chapters in their local communities that are both a space for people to have a supportive community that knows how to be empathic and caring about each other, that works together and is accepting of each other's faults, accepting of each other's shortcomings as they work to transform our society. So that within the culture of the chapter, there's an empathic space, there's an accepting space, there's a kind space, because the other thing that's happened in social change movements is because we're so embedded in this culture of get attention and become known and step on each other's toes, that it infuses and undermines the effectiveness of social change movements and of organizations. And so we want organizations to exist that are supportive of each other, that are understanding that people are going to make mistakes because we're human beings and we falter and we wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or we have somebody yell at us, or we yell at somebody, that's part of our nature, and to approach each other with care and compassion and empathy, and to build a culture of support for that within the chapters, and then go out into the world and live it as you're working to transform the world, as you're trying to pass the ESRA, as you're trying to get the Global Marshall Plan move forward, as you're trying to change the culture in your workplace, in the legal system, in your education system. But that there's a culture of support, like you said, so that people don't feel so lonely. And as these bubbles increase, they'll start to bump into each other. So you'll find you're in a bubble of empathy, and then suddenly, hopefully, you'll bump into another bubble that is also working for social change, but is also grounded in the understandings of compassion and empathy. And so then it expands. And so then it's safer to risk, if you will, really being who we truly want to be in the world.
Well, you were talking about all the different programs that you have, or the not just programs, but like the different positions or strategies that the Network of Spiritual Progressives have. One thing I'm looking at, the way I've been approaching it, is that really to foster empathy, that we want empathic connection, that's kind of like the gateway, the space, and to leave the strategies open. And that like my goal is, how do we create more empathy in the world by being empathic, fostering empathy? And so there's typically there's the progressives and the conservatives. Conservatives said, no government. Progressives say, yeah, we need, a fair amount of government to solve problems. And I'm trying to say, well, it doesn't matter if we have the society 100% government controlled or 0%. It's really that we have an empathic space, that we have an empathic relationship, and that the strategies kind of grow out of that connection. I mean, as you know, in mediation, you come in with all your strategies, and we really start connecting to each other. The strategies totally change totally. So can we come from a space that the one value we have is that we want an empathic connection, that we want a culture of empathy, and that through those dialogues, the strategies will emerge, but that we have like a transformational empathic culture.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm not trying to check, are you asking me, so how do we, what's the word I'm looking for? How do we hold both, how do we hold within the network kind of an empathic space and also some concrete strategies?
Yeah.
Do those seem in contradiction?
I guess so.
Yeah. So one of the, as I said at the very beginning, the NSP and Tikkun is a consciousness raising group. So the thing about human beings is that most of us aren't grounded in empathic skills, in understanding what our needs are. And sometimes it helps to have strategies to engage in conversations and to raise consciousness about a different way of being in the world. And through that, who knows what will emerge. So the SRA is similar, if you think about, similar to what the ERA was, now the Equal Rights Amendment, right? The Equal Rights Amendment was not just to pass an amendment. It was a consciousness-raising effort. The women's rights movement engaged in consciousness raising in homes, in communities, in women's groups, and it expanded. And the ERA was a path by which to help people have these conversations. It never passed. Now, I wish it had passed, but it didn't pass. But what it did do was it created a change in consciousness, and it dismantled to some extent patriarchy. Now, we have a long way to go, but we're a lot further than we were. So the SRA, if you will, and other policies are similar things. They're a way to start dialogue about what is our shared values. Our shared values are this new bottom line. Here's some concrete proposals that we think would achieve that. And what we want is people to be dialoguing about these.
Mm-hmm.
I
So it's
believe,
really a conversation starter, and then you're trying to be open about being empathic within the conversation to, well, maybe we'll come up with something
right,
different, but at least it's the starting point and it's starting a
right,
conversation is what I'm hearing there.
exactly. Now, I believe that if the ESRA passed with some tweaking that inevitably would happen, we would have the beginning of a foundation of a society that was, in fact, embedded in a new bottom line. And that new bottom line, again, is love and kindness and care and all of those things that are embedded in empathy, essentially, right? Um, so I believe it would achieve that. Am I attached to that being the only solution? No. I happen to think it's a great solution, and what I want is people talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we had people in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, both at the federal level and at the state level and at city councils, debating and discussing these things, the whole dialogue would be different. Instead of saying what's wrong with the world, which is often what left progressive groups are doing. They're complaining about fracking, about GMOs, about all really important things. But what they're not doing is saying, here's my dream. Here's my vision of the world I want. And that's part of what the ESRA and the Global Marshall Plan does. It
Mm-hmm.
says, here's the vision of the dream I want, this new bottom line, and here's a concrete way to achieve that. Let's start to talk about that and put that forward. And as we did that, we'd be doing consciousness raising, we'd be engaged in conversations, we'd be hearing each other with open hearts, with empathy and understanding. And we'd come up with, I mean, we're creative people. We'd come up with solutions, and we might find the solutions we propose are the best, or they might not be. But it would start a dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's really about fostering that dialogue then, and kind of going from there, see where it goes. Well, one thing, I've been working a while now on empathy, and posted. If you see the website, there's hundreds, over 300 interviews, empathy experts, whatever, from around the world. All the articles and all that. But I'm seeing a need for more direct action. It seems within our society that unless you kind of like the civil rights movement, get right up in the face of the structures that are kind of having that oppressive structures, I guess, of society. But the society says, "Oh, okay, that's good. This is the reality," and it takes some kind of a direct action. So I've kind of been thinking about that. During the Occupy movement, we had an empathy tent that set up at Berkeley. That's the picture of it there. It was, Martin Luther King on MLK. I can't remember the name of the park there, but it's like right downtown Berkeley. So we set up this empathy.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we set up the empathy tent. We're offering empathic listening, conflict resolution. We did art, and it came those last 2 weeks of the Occupy movement before the police shut it down. And it was really hard. I mean, it was a really kind of a dysfunctional, there was a knife fight, attempted rapes, drug addiction, alcoholism. It was like a really difficult, but it was already the Occupy seemed to be kind of an us and them. It's the 99 against the 1%, and it seemed to have a basic, us and them framework. But I'm looking at how can we take direct action like that, but do it in an empathic way. So that's just something I've been thinking about,
Right.
and kind of looking for ways that how do you, it's like within Occupy Oakland, one of my partners, she set up an empathy circle, invited the mayor to come down to talk in the interfaith tent there at Occupy Oakland. And she didn't come. She sent 3 staffers. But the staffers, we had a circle and we talked. And I said, hey, this is really a momentous event because it's 3 months that Occupy's been here. We've never been invited to the dialogue. And this is the first time in 3 months. And so that's kind of like, the progressive, it has a lot of that, you're the bad guys, the police are the bad guys, the officials are the bad guys, we don't want to hear your voice, and
Right.
but it's like it seems that a real movement needs to include everyone, to be an empathic movement, that everybody's voice is there. But yet it also has to come up against something against the social structures that are kind of
Right.
oppressive. So it's a bit of a dilemma. I mean,
Right.
I have ideas about how to do it, but I guess I'm just throwing it out there
Yeah.
because that's pretty much what you're talking about, right? Is
Right.
how do you get up in the
Right.
cultural boundaries and
Right.
take a strong stance, but an empathic, a
Right.
caring
So that's
stance.
why, yeah, so that's why it's important to have some concrete proposals. So the SRA, basically, we believe that there are tons of people, the majority of people in corporations are really good people and want to do quote unquote the right thing. In other words, care about the environment, care about how people are treated in the workplace, care about how people are treated around the world, right? The majority of people care about those things. The way corporations are structured, however, don't allow that caring to be the primary mechanism by which the corporation works or the people within the corporation works. So an example, when the oil, was it the oil spill? It wasn't an oil spill. When the explosion in Bhopal, India happened and all those people were killed and injured, the CEO of, was it Shell or I can't remember the oil company, went to Bhopal. Okay, he gets on the plane and he goes to Bhopal and he sees the tragedy and he responds as any human being would respond. We will take care of you. We are so sorry about this. We will do what we need to do. So there's the human, right? Outside of a structure of a corporate system. He goes back home to the States and he gets into the structure of the corporate system. And what
Mm.
happens? He changes his tune.
Mm-hmm.
Why does he change his tune? Because he's got to deal with the bottom line of the stockholders. What is the bottom line of the stockholders? Maximizing their profit. So we have to challenge the system, and people within the system aren't bad people. We've just, as human beings, created systems under a premise that the way to maximize that what's best for human beings is to maximize money and power. And if we did that, all human beings would thrive. Well, really, we have found out that that system actually hasn't really worked as people wanted. It wasn't that people, at least the majority of people, did it out of ill will. They didn't. Most people created corporations and grew their corporations with the belief that it would be helpful, with the belief that actually money trickles down. Well, we've learned actually now that it's not happening the way we thought. It's actually not maximizing the well-being of most people. It's maximizing the well-being of a very few people. And so if we can think about it that way, then we can approach our actions and our proposals not from saying, therefore, anybody who's in a corporation is bad, but from a place of saying, our system's not working. It was created by human beings who are flawed, who had a misperception of how to do what's best for all beings. And now we need to look at new systems and structures. And it's helpful to have some ideas of what those would look like. And in
Mm-hmm.
the context of businesses and in the context of professions, I said to you, we're gathering together lawyers and people in the medical profession and other professions to say, how do we do this in your profession? Talk about it with us, brainstorm with us, write articles for us in Cocoon and on our blog, and let's engage in a social discussion about this. So Cocoon Magazine, I don't know if you've ever read it, and I would
Oh
really
yeah.
encourage all your readers to subscribe to the magazine and join the network, is a place for discourse. We don't only allow what might be perceived as our position in the magazine. We allow for discussions and debates. We often have um, topical articles, so one topic on one topic. At one point we had a topical discussion on move to amend and the SRA. How do we get money out of politics? And we had discussion and debate about what's the quote-unquote best approach. So we really welcome a lively discourse and debate. Our blog is filled with people presenting things from different perspectives, and they don't always agree. And what is our kind of floor in this? That you don't attack people. So we've never allowed, when there was all those attacks on Bush, personal attacks. We never allowed them. So we don't allow attacks on people. We allow challenges to ideas. But we never allow it to be a personal attack. Because we want to promote an entirely different way of engaging in discussions and debates, and to ask the questions, because we have to together come up with the creative solutions. We have some solutions that we think are great, but if there's better solutions out there, cool. Great. I want solutions that create a world that are grounded in the new bottom line of love and care, kindness and generosity, environmental sustainability, social and economic justice, treating each other as embodiments of the sacred, and celebration of awe and wonder and radical amazement of the universe. Because then we'll actually make the difficult choices we need to make to save our world. That's the world I want. What that looks like, I mean, what are the specific strategies? I'm open. But I really want us to get there, and I believe the only way to get there is through open dialogue from a place of open-hearted empathy and compassion and connection. But that doesn't preclude ideas. I mean, one of the challenges I think with Occupy was they weren't willing to at some point say, who has some really good concrete ideas, and what should we do? And we really also need grounded concrete ideas, because we've got to try something. We can't just only have empathy. We have to have action and new proposals and new concrete ideas. Empathy is wonderful for creating connection, but it doesn't create ideas. Ideas are created through strategy, proposals, through debate, through conversation, through disagreement. And then we have concrete ideas, and then we try them out. I mean, we could say that the experiment we've been doing for the past few hundred years really has kind of failed.
Well, in terms of there's kind of this process of how the ideas get generated and the strategies get. If we start with the dialogue, if we have that empathic connection where we're willing to listen with each other, and start creating that dialogue, that there's and it maybe even starts before that. I'd seen you'd talked a bit about self-empathy. That maybe we start with that self-connection, what's going on inside of ourselves, and that once we have that self-connection, and that we can connect with others with that empathy, and then once, I mean, this is just the kind of the arc that I see in terms of how the connection happens, that people start connecting with each other, start hearing each other, and start getting to the deeper needs that they have. And that the ideas start coming up out of that. I mean, that's just kind of a basic. And if you can get people to start having that dialogue with all the judgments and that stuff kind of getting in the way, that. But I kind of extend empathy. That empathy is that self-empathy in terms of the. You'd mentioned also that empathic connection of the dialogue, maybe a mirrored empathy. And then what I would call an imaginative empathy, which is role playing, that you can take anyone's role. Academics call it perspective taking or cognitive empathy. But then there's another part which I would call empathic creativity and action. That there's a type of action that is not an action that excludes or suppresses someone. It's a type of action that includes. And it's like a shared action. So I mean, a lot of times the definition of empathy doesn't get stretched into that part. It's seen as, oh, it kind of ends just with the dialogue. But there's really a quality of connection, of creativity, and of action that grows out of that. So it's a special type of creativity. It has a special quality to it. So I guess I see a larger definition of empathy, and that's just wanted to kind of share that. Because I've interviewed people like Dan Batson, who's one of the, he's been studying empathy for 35 years or something. He has all the footnotes and he lays out all the different ways empathy is used, and there's so much confusion in terms of words in general. He says, well, before you start a conversation, it's good to really define how you're using the word. So I just bring that up for clarity's sake.
No, well, I appreciate that. No, I agree with you that at some point there is often a natural place where you get to problem solving. It can take, I mean, if there's large differences, it can take quite a while. I agree with that, and I also think that if people are deeply grounded in an empathic space, in other words, they can really see and understand where another person's coming from, or in this case, where an entire right, if you will, perspective is coming from, and where an entire left perspective is coming from. That I value those people putting forth ideas because it may be that those ideas are the best ideas, and it will jumpstart us more quickly to get there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so as best as possible. And do they promote an empathic worldview? You know, or our new bottom line is how we call it, worldview. So
Oh, you just cut out a little bit. I think the connection was, I didn't quite hear that
my
last
connection is
sentence.
messing up here.
Yeah, I didn't hear that last sentence.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear
Okay.
you. Just the last sentence was,
Can you hear me now?
yep, hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, okay, great. So I think the last sentence, the last sentence was to that the proposals that we put forth are hopefully, I believe, are proposals grounded in empathic spaces of all beings. In other words, trying to understand and hold empathy for all beings without judgment, and also putting forth solutions that actually meet the needs of most people. And actually, I would say, really, at the end of the day, they would meet all people's needs. But they aren't the only solutions, as I've said. And we want people to join our movement, and they can do that by going to spiritualprogressives.org and clicking on the donate button and join donate button to join our movement and engage in these wonderful conversations. What do they think about the ESRA? What do they think about the Global Marshall Plan? How would they, in their profession, if they're in the legal profession or in the healthcare profession, how would they start to what would a transformation of their profession look like? If they work in Silicon Valley, what would a transformation of that work environment and what the products that they create, not just the environment, but the actual production and products, what would it look like if it was grounded in a new bottom line? Without any saying that anybody's wrong for what we've done, it's just that what we've done actually isn't nurturing each other, people, or the planet, or all the beings that live on our planet. It's not sustaining any of us. So how do we create a world that does sustain us without saying, you're all messed up for having created this world? You know, we kind of did mess up. But we don't need to, you know, judge and criticize. We need to say, okay, it hasn't done what we were hoping it would do. How can we create a new world that would? And let's put forth a vision of what that looks like, both in broad language that's inclusive of the new bottom line and also in concrete proposals.
So what are your next steps? Do you have any kind of projects or workshops or coming up in the next couple of months?
We, well, one of the next steps is to try to create these working groups in these different professions. So if people are interested in that, they can email me at kat@spiritualprogressives.org, and we can talk about how we might get them plugged in. I'm working to get some chapters going around the country so that people can start to engage in these conversations. And so if people want to start a chapter and are excited about that, or simply want to start a local group that's reading articles in Tikkun or some of these empathy and talking about how do we engage us in our political work, to again get in touch with me about that. And I'm going to have calls that are supporting people to help them have chapters that are really feeling supported and sustained. So there'll be monthly calls with people with concrete monthly actions and engagements that they'll be doing. So if they want to focus on the ESRA, for example, we'd be talking about, okay, let's first really understand it, the nuts and bolts of it for a while. And we'll practice doing role plays, and we'll practice having conversations. And in those practices, will learn how to respond empathically to people who object, to people who don't agree, people who push back. So, how do we respond from a place of empathy to those concerns rather than from a place of we're better than, or we're self-righteous, or we know we're right and you're wrong? How do we really hear their concerns empathically? So that'll be part of the practice, for example, of the calls. And then we'll move from there. How do we educate the public? How do we bring it to city and county councils? How do we expand it from there? So that's just like an example of how a chapter is to flow. We've been contacted by people around the country to bring this workshop around Israel-Palestine to different places. So if somebody's interested in having us, Rabbi Lerner and I, come and do a workshop, if we're traveling somewhere, we'll probably make it a longer workshop to make it worth everybody's while. But if they want to bring us to their local community to do a workshop, which is focused on empathy, but also focused on understanding the history, not just the factual history, but the psychological history that has given rise to this conflict. And so that's creating a very empathic understanding of both sides. So we do these workshops, and so if people want to bring us to their community, they can contact me again at kat@spiritualprogressives.org, and we can talk about how to arrange that. And then we're also working on trainings. I think we're going to be doing one in New York for, like I mentioned, for social change activists, to help them both articulate the fact that they're coming from this new bottom line, and also to learn how to talk in an empathic way to people who aren't agreeing with them, in the hopes that they can build alliances across differences.
Well, one thing I've been thinking of is I've got so much, like I was mentioning, in terms of material. I really feel like I'm wanting to do some kind of an action, like, set up an Occupy Empathy, kind of something that is kind of an action, but that is based on empathy, that intends to foster empathy, so basically an Occupy, but with the intention from the ground up to create more empathy in the community. And so would a network of spiritual progressives be interested in something like that, or have support for some kind of a action, like a direct action from the ground up?
Yeah, well, we can definitely talk about that and see how we might work together on something like that. Yeah, I mean, that certainly sounds interesting to me. And also, if you do something like that, you could also write about it, and we could potentially publish it on our blog or online, or maybe even in a written magazine, and then you can talk about that and talk about, well, this was a success, this was a failure, this where it worked, this is maybe some of the strengths I see of it, this is maybe some of the challenges, so that we can engage in that discussion too. So, but yeah, definitely. I mean, you know how to reach me. So,
are you here in Berkeley now, or is that?
I am.
Okay. Yeah, I'm El Cerrito, so it's just down the street.
So. We're quite close.
Yeah, well, great. Well, thanks, Kat, for sharing all that, and I definitely have other ideas like to talk with you about, and kind of in terms of strategies. And so this is a good start, I hope, to a longer dialogue that we can have about cultural change and empathy.
Great. Well, thank you, and if you could post up that website once again for folks, spiritualprogressives.org. So folks know where to find us. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that's it right here in the URL, spiritualprogressives.org.
Right. Great.
Okay, with that, thank you.
Thank you, Edwin.